Okay, so again, I'm going to walk us through the policy landscape. We will move into our agenda setting for 2022 and what we've done since October. Again, I'll highlight a local win and some state wins as well, and then talk about what's next. So this is our quick, I'm going to do a 5-minute civics lesson just to get us started. It's important for us to understand the policy landscape, just to be able to figure out the context in which we're working on a daily basis, both at the state level and the local level. So what's important to understand about South Carolina, what makes us somewhat unique, is that we have a 2-year legislative cycle. Many states just have the 1-year cycle. And this will run from the second Tuesday in January to the second Tuesday in May of any given year. And within the 2-year cycle, there is a summer recess. They come back, and the following January, they start again. So bills have 2 years to try to get through, or in many states, it's just 1 year. So we just finished the second year of our 2-year cycle. We have a new cycle coming up that will start in January, and that will run 2023 to 2024. So any bills that just didn't make it this past couple of weeks in May will, the technical term is that they die. So bills that did not make it through the last 2-year cycle die in committee and will have to start over from scratch in January 2023 in the hopes that they can make it by May 2024. So when folks talk about why policy takes so long, this is one of the reasons why policy is a long game in South Carolina. So we're working to understand within the 2-year cycle where we can move and what we can make strategic kind of gains within the 2-year cycle. And so it is a long game we're trying to get through. When a bill needs to get rushed and those in power want to make it happen, it can happen in a matter of weeks. But for the most part, most policies take a year or more to get through. In terms of our chambers, we have the state Senate and the state House. There are 46 senators in our state Senate, and they serve a 4-year term. There are 124 members in our House, and they serve a 2-year term. So I encourage you to check out our State House website. It's scstatehouse.gov. I'm going to share my screen later and explore some of that website with you. It's a wealth of information once you understand how to navigate the website. It's pretty user-friendly. In the beginning, it can be clunky. But it is important for us to understand that policy landscape as we're moving in. And so when I came in October, that was halfway through a legislative cycle. So we had to do some catching up, put out an agenda rather quickly. But now I'm excited to have this summer to strategize for the next 2-year session that's ahead of us. And if anyone went to school in the era of Schoolhouse Rock, you'll remember I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. I'm going to walk us through a much more boring version of that now. This is a screenshot of a bill that passed. This is Senate 0222 or 222. And so this is a great visual I pulled from the State House website to help you understand how long it takes to pass. And so this is a bill that started in the Senate. You can see first we'll walk through this visual of the green dots. This is helpful to understand where it started. So here we're starting in the Senate. The bill was pre-filed. You can scroll down to see the history of how a bill moves through both chambers. So in December of 2020, it was pre-filed. So legislators can put in some legislation early to get a head start before January term officially started. So this bill was started in December. It was pre-filed of 2020. And as soon as a bill is pre-filed, it's sent to the appropriate committee. So both Senate and the House have committees ranging from education to municipal affairs, military and veterans affairs. We have all sorts of committees, ways and means in both. So this was referred to Family and Veteran Services. It was introduced and read the first time January 12th, which is, I believe, that second day of session. We have a second referral to committee. It goes back after the first reading, has to have some amendments perhaps. Then it's read a second time and a third time, and that will pass. But you can see that took about 2 months for it to pass. This passed unanimously, which is great. Then it's sent to the other chamber. So it will come down to the House now to be introduced, read to their committee. And in this case, it's Medical, Military, Public, and Municipal Affairs in the House. Again, it's sent to committee. They might make a report, add some amendments, and then again, it's read 3 times, has to be voted. This was unanimous again, which is impressive. This is our kinship care bill. I'm going to talk about this at length just a little bit later. And so if it passes both houses, or both chambers rather, it's what we call ratified and then sent to the governor's desk. The governor will sign it and it becomes a law, it becomes an act, and you can see that happened within 2 weeks here. And so that was just passed. The governor can also veto it. It goes back to the House and they'll have to reread it and they can override the veto. But luckily, we don't see that very often. But you can understand why so many bills take up to 2 years or more to work through the legislative process. So not to bore you with the details, but I do think it's important for us to understand kind of the context of how our bills move forward. And we'll move on. Okay, so understanding our context, we had some goals for the year to understand kind of where we were, how to make this work, and what we needed to do in October, understanding that, again, I came in halfway through a 2-year cycle. So first we had to publish a state level agenda. That was something just to share where our goals were for social issues and what we're hoping to see. And so that was done, and I can share that link for you. Many of our staff have seen that agenda. I'm going to go ahead and drop it in the chat in just a moment. So we had the agenda published online. That's a living document and just kind of guides where we're going to move and what directions we'll move on some social issues. Our next item for me as the Director of Advocacy was to develop relationships with key legislators and their staff. Staffers are really important. Oftentimes they're the gatekeepers to the elected official, and they are also policy advisors for the elected official. So understanding which staffers are important makes all of our jobs easier in advocacy. And we have some important legislators that reside in Spartanburg or represent Spartanburg. And perhaps the most powerful when it comes to United Way's agenda is Rita Allison from Spartanburg. She is the chair of the House Education Committee. So when we think about what we need done for education, Representative Allison is a major position of power with education, and she is for the kids. She is really a great partner for us. And then we also convene partners around shared policy issues. So we have the ability to pull together as a backbone organization, smaller nonprofits or partners who are involved in the work. We were able to do this with our partners at First Steps for Early Care and Learning. There's a bill that influenced where First Steps might be in the budget process, because the bill introduced by Scott Talley from Spartanburg would have moved First Steps as an independent agency right now underneath the governor as a cabinet level agency. And so while it didn't name United Way, we could serve as that third party convener to bring the senator and the Office of First Steps and some partners together around a table. And we did that to start a conversation and to build a relationship between the senator and the partners who were impacted by the bill, so that they could have some neutral space to work things out. They'll be working together this summer. That bill did not make it through both committees, but we will be working with those partners to understand what we could do to pre-file some legislation and support both First Steps and the senator throughout this process. And the importance of policy in terms of state coalitions, our next bullet point here, is that we can do so much more in partnership than we could ever do alone, especially as we're moving into the advocacy space. We're lucky to have a little bit of framework, and we have a state association to lean on, but the coalitions are important for us to have a little bit more leverage and to use our voice. So the first coalition that we're starting is called the Coalition for Whole Child Policy. And this is with some partners with Strive Together Action Network. So we brought together our sister organization, Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative down in Charleston to represent the Low Country. We have some partners at the USC School of Education, All for SC out of Columbia, and then Spartanburg Academic Movement, where I'm shared, and United Way came together to work on some issues from cradle to career. So there are existing policy initiatives for education. There's so many, but we haven't found a coalition who's working along the cradle to career continuum for education. And so we are bringing on Institute for Child Success as well to join us for the early learning space, to think about policies and shaping a shared agenda for the next year that will advance child well-being and family well-being along the cradle to career continuum. So that's very exciting. We're also parts of other coalitions like Live Healthy Spartanburg that's been existing. And I think the more we can do to partner and have a shared voice at the table, the better our odds are at passing some legislation later on. And then we also wanted to be visible. Part of advocacy is behind the scenes. That's a lot of what I do, just tracking legislation or talking with our representatives, but advocacy also has to be visible. And so we had a couple of opinion pieces published. I've published 2, we have 2 on the way. We've done a sign-on letter to represent some of United Way's interest in getting ARPA dollars for our nonprofits, and ARPA is the American Rescue Act plan. There's a lot of federal money that's making its way into the state, county, and city, and we were hoping to advocate for some of those dollars to make it to nonprofits. We've sent a letter to the governor in partnership with One Spartanburg. We've got some letters drafted to representatives on an issue that I'll talk about later. It's around 988. And we will be publishing data next year. And again, I'll talk about this later in the presentation on fiscal mapping. So I'll be doing a fiscal analysis of all state funding on education to identify some gaps and use data as a tool for advocacy. So this is kind of my first 6 months of what we needed to do to jump into the cycle. And now we can move into strategy. And so I'll be excited to share that with y'all in just a bit. So luckily, in the process of starting an agenda forming process, I had some framework to lean on. And this is the United Way Association of South Carolina. We're able to model much of our agenda after the work that's been done with Naomi and our state coalition within all of the United Ways in South Carolina. So on the left column here, we have legislative priorities. Those are specific bills that United Way is sponsoring, the association is sponsoring or working with a lobbyist. These are specific pieces of legislation. And on the right-hand side, there's a policy agenda, which are more broad goals that we hope to see on social issues. And again, you can see that broken down by some of United Way's impact agenda with health, financial stability. We use the term economic mobility, education, and then COVID-19 is a major response area and policy as well. So I was able to model much of our agenda after the United Way Association's agenda. And so just knowing where we came in without much interface with specific legislation before October, I stuck to the more broad policy agenda for our own model. I will move us into that. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment just to bring you to our website. So I wanted to be able to walk you through our advocacy page here, and you'll be able to see a couple of things. I want to give a huge shout out to Carly for getting this website updated and up and running. You'll see you can access the South Carolina page here on the right, or the advocacy agenda for us on the left, and that's what I'm going to walk us through right now. So you'll see our priority agenda kind of explaining our advocacy roles. I'm going to do that in just a moment. But I want to make sure before we dive into the agenda that we understand how our policies are related to our bold goals. And so I have broken the categories down into health and safe environments, education, and economic mobility and basic needs. So as we move through the presentation, I just want us to remember how all of our policies have to be connected to our bold goals to move folks into economic mobility or better access to health or better educational outcomes. And so I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat and go back to screen sharing. And just bear with me. Fantastic. Alrighty. So when it comes to being able to understand how to jump in and get involved in policy, I think it's really important to understand how an institution like the United Way will get involved. So we have 4 levels of engagement that I have decided that we'll move as an organization. We have lead, advocate, support, and monitor. So lead is going to be grass tops, and grass tops, most folks know grassroots, grass tops are the decision makers, politicians, and folks who are making laws and policy every day or enacting them. So think our state representatives and senators, our city and county officials, and some of our institutional leaders. So when I am leading with an issue, we're working on educating the grass tops folks. Thank you, Alex, for dropping that link. So this is a large percentage of my time really focusing on an issue, educating the politicians about the issue and how it impacts our community. The next level down is advocate. And so this is where we're bringing in the same level of energy that I use on the Grass Tops leaders. We're using the same capacity to work with community. So developing community voice and empowering folks to use their voice to get involved in political issues. This is empowering other nonprofit folks in the space to understand how the issue relates to their goals as well and their vision. And so we have to really think about how to pair grassroots and grass tops. My position is unique because I can be the bridge between the two. So engaging our politicians, but also engaging our community members to drive change on the ground. And so just to give an example of how United Way might be leading on an issue and advocating on an issue, I would say Hannah's work with the Behavioral Health Task Force is an example of leading and advocating. So engaging grass tops leaders and bringing together folks around a table to understand the issue of behavioral health in general and mental health in general, but also advocating with community members to understand what's going on through case management or through some of our homeless task force work. There's a lot of work that we're doing at both the grass tops and the grassroots level. The next level down is support. This is where other agencies are leading the way. And we have so many examples of this. The most clear example is the Together SC umbrella organization for nonprofits. They are a great voice. They represent us well, but they needed help asking for some of those federal dollars. And they were hoping to have some dollars come through up to 100 million for nonprofits. So they needed everyone's voice at the table. So we were able to sign a letter, add our brand name to it, and that's kind of a support. So we're letting someone else take the lead on those issues. And then monitor is outside of our scope of education, economic mobility, or health, but some issues do impact us or impact those three areas. So I might not have this very public, but I would be watching a bill behind the scenes or seeing what others are leading on an issue and just quietly monitoring it, but knowing that it does impact us. And if I can move us along, too many screens going. Okay, I'm not going to drag us down with the policy priorities here, but you can see I kind of created a rubric for how we'll move into policy selecting. And so this has to be pretty regimented so that we understand, again, how it impacts our bold goals. It needs to impact a barrier to access to health, education, or economic opportunity. It needs to promote equity and opportunity gaps or understanding those structural barriers. It has to be feasible just with the capacity that we have and understanding that two-year structure and the political landscape. We need to move on policies that are likely to get through. And we're hoping that some of them have a kind of a clear path to being passed, meaning that it would be nonpartisan or bipartisan. There's support, there's funding available. And also we need to center those who are most closely impacted by the issue and bringing in our community partners. So with that, I'm going to transition us into a local win. So I'm very excited about this. Now we're going to shift gears kind of out of our United Way bubble and into the local and state category here. So broadband is an issue that I am personally connected to. I think it's fascinating. Broadband policy is something that I wanted to work in when I was in grad school because half of my program ended up being on Zoom. And so understanding the digital divide became a central point to my grad school education. And we have a local win to celebrate. The federal dollars that flowed into the county for COVID relief, again, those are called the American Rescue Act plan. The county received upwards of $62 million, and they have allocated $4.5 million to broadband expansion. So the map that you're seeing on your screen is from the Office of Regulatory Staff. They have a broadband office, and they use GIS tracking and mapping services to show areas of need in the county. So if you've never worked in broadband policy, there are a couple of terms you need to know. These green areas are download and upload speeds. The federal minimum standard is 100 millibytes per second download speed and 20 millibytes per second upload speed. This would support several devices being able to stream or have online learning, have virtual meetings and Zooms. It's a pretty minimum standard. We'd like to see it above that 100 to 100 is optimal. So this is fantastic speed. So you can see there's some darker areas of the county that have excellent broadband access. But so that's what we understand the green to be. The red and brown areas are underserved households. And so that's a large part of the county, mostly in our rural areas. So if we start at the top left of our county, we have unserved areas in Little Chicago, Campobello, and Landrum. Moving down here, we have kind of the Clifton, Packlet area. Moving further south, we're in kind of the Cross Anchor, coming down to Woodruff, and some right below Reedville. So there are major parts of the county, and the darker red is the highest density of unserved homes. So with broadband, you have a lot to understand federally and at the state level, and then with private partners as well. So the issue with some of our rural areas is that providers like Charter, AT&T, it's very expensive for them to install broadband for very low density areas, which are mostly our rural counties. And so for them to install broadband off of the main arteries is called last mile. And the return on investment for them to install broadband for a house that's only going to pay maybe $40 a month for broadband is not high enough for them to install it. But with these federal dollars, our county is now going to subsidize some of the cost to expand into the rural areas so that folks will now have access to broadband in those last mile areas. So that is major, but that's not enough. So the work will be done and started through 2024. It will take several years after that. In terms of advocacy, we're really happy to see that the county is investing in broadband. But again, it's not enough. It's not enough just to have access to broadband. It also needs to be affordable. So we'll be looking into seeing what the city, county, and state can do to subsidize broadband for folks who maybe can't afford it at their household. And so that access piece is huge. And we know that broadband and Wi-Fi connects you to the digital economy, perhaps to telehealth and to educational opportunities. Even though schools are back in person, students' homework is still online, folks are taking classes online, adults returning to education need Wi-Fi and broadband. So this is an issue that cross-cuts all of our bold goals and will be definitely a voice in this arena. Once it's installed, we have to make sure that it's accessible and affordable as well. If you have any questions on broadband, I love to talk about it. So you can catch me offline or put some in questions in the chat. And I do have a link to drop for you about broadband if you're interested. There's a wonderful site where you can explore your county. So if you're a data person, go ahead and open up this link. You can type in your specific zip code and see what's available to you in terms of providers, or you can search at the county level. They have areas of need. This is a really well done website. So definitely spend some time exploring that if you have any interest in digital equity or closing that digital divide. All righty. So we're ready to move into policy progress at the state level. This is important because, again, as we focus beyond our city and county, it's important for us to understand some of our state dynamics as well. So again, understanding that our agenda was broken out into education, economic mobility, basic needs, and health and safe environments. In the interest of time, I chose one or two bills in each one of those categories for us to work on and to highlight today. There are many more bills that passed. I wish I had time to talk about them today, but these are the ones I'm going to focus on for today. So in terms of education, there's a phenomenal program that came out in November that will increase access to economic mobility, increase access to workforce opportunities, and drive educational attainment, which is one of Spartanburg's 40-30 challenge, is to have 40% of the population will have a baccalaureate degree or above by 2030. I hope we're on track. I know we're not quite there, and 2030 is fast approaching. This is a program, the Workforce Scholarships might help us get there in the future. And so Workforce Scholarships is a program through Governor McMaster's office. This did not go through the House and Senate in a traditional way. Thank you, Megan. We're at 26%. So we're not quite at that 40% mark, but we could get there. Let's see what we can do. Governor McMaster recognized some of the signs that we're seeing in the workforce where South Carolina is having trouble attracting or retaining talent. And the workforce is also dependent on some educational opportunities for folks to qualify for some of our manufacturing jobs and above. And so he created this program which provides free tuition for associate's degrees that will train people in those high needs fields. And so that would include some of our technology and manufacturing, transportation and logistics technology, nursing is one, and there's several within the umbrella of the associate's degrees that train people for the high needs industries. So this is a program, it's free tuition for those who can maintain a GPA, I think of a 2.5 or 2.8 and above. And it is a 2-year pilot right now. So from 2022, it started in January to 2024. I have had a conversation with the governor about this, that he's already looking for funding to continue the pilot beyond 2024. So associate's degrees are not going to count for the 40-30 challenge because that's bachelor's and above. But in terms of education for our whole population, I think this is a major win for attainment and access to education. So we're celebrating this. This is a wonderful news out of the governor's office. Again, it's just a pilot, but he's looking for funding to make this permanent. And we have our local partner, Spartanburg Community College, who has already been leading the way and setting trends with free tuition. They've announced that they're continuing the program. So Spartanburg is definitely poised to benefit from our workforce scholarships. In terms of economic mobility and basic needs, kinship care is the bill actually that I used to show you how things pass both chambers. This was a Senate bill that passed unanimously, which is also very rare. So both the Senate and the House unanimously voted to pass this. For those of you who are unfamiliar with kinship care, most folks know foster care and understand that system. A federal guidance came out last year that requires state agencies like DSS to place children first in kinship care. And kinship can be blood relative or a trusted adult. So a youth pastor, a teacher, someone a child has a trusting relationship with. DSS has to prioritize those families or kins before they're able to place a child in the general foster care system. The thought behind that is that it would be better socially and emotionally for children to be with a trusted adult. And I can understand that. But the reality is, in the state, South Carolina doesn't provide the financial assistance to the kinship families the same way they do to the foster care families. So we see children being placed, and the burden of feeding kids and clothing them and having them ready for school is a major economic burden on families, especially when they don't have much time to prepare. And so this bill passed that will now provide financial assistance to kinship families the same way that foster care families. So we're hoping that we see better child outcomes from this and better basic needs met by the families who are providing the assistance to the child and the child themselves. So this is a win for the basic needs of kids and economic kind of stability at this point for those families who are taking care of the kids in this system. So again, it's not a perfect system, but we do think this will be a benefit to our state. The next category of economic mobility that we're excited to see is parental leave for state employees. 6 weeks of paid leave will be provided for those who give birth, and 2 weeks will be provided for adoptions or the co-parent leave. So this is great. Before, there was no leave guaranteed for state employees. So I do want to put a little bookmark here. Teachers are not state employees. Teachers are district employees. So folks were excited to see this for teachers, but this is not including teachers. State employees would be your municipalities and workers for the state and those state agencies. So we can still work on the teachers later on, but for now, this is a good start for our state employees. And moving into access and safe access to health and safe environments, the biggest one I want to focus on today is Medicaid extension. This is massive. We were able to, with the Department of Health and Human Services, came out with a guidance extending Medicaid for new mothers, postpartum mothers, for 12 months. Before, they were only covered for 6 weeks. This program, the 12-month extension, will allow new moms to have access to care to work through perhaps postpartum depression and anxiety and catch some of the other complications after birth. This is huge for 2 generations, for both mom and the new baby. And so we're really happy to see this happen. And the pharmacy access bill allows folks to access contraception without going to a doctor. So we know the state folks are uninsured. Accessing a doctor and accessing care can be just unsurmountable in terms of the barriers that folks have to pass. So now contraception will be available through pharmacies, and birth control in particular at pharmacies without having to see a doctor. So teenagers and youth especially will benefit from this, but folks who are uninsured will also benefit from being able to access this service at a pharmacy instead of having to navigate the healthcare system. We're excited to see these move forward. And as happy as we are about those 5 bills, there are some things that were unresolved in this session. So we were really hoping to see a Senate Bill 16 called financial literacy. This was championed by the United Way Association of South Carolina. The lobbyists that we work with really carried some of the weight on this. It would not have directly lifted kids out of poverty, we understand that, but it would have equipped high school seniors with a financial literacy class that gave them skills to understand credit, debt, student loans, what is a mortgage and how does that impact your overall credit, how to navigate financial decisions, things that I wish I had access to as a high school senior. It made it almost to the finish line, and 2 weeks before it was sent to conference committee. There's a small chance this could still get through in the next few weeks, but we're holding out. If it doesn't, we'll reintroduce it in January. So we have another 2-year window to try to get that through. In terms of economic mobility and basic needs, teacher pay was something that we were watching at the state level. This, again, we need to bookmark because it could happen. The House and the Senate had different ideas on how to spend the budget, and there's some tension at the end. They had different ideas on how teachers should get a salary increase. So we're waiting to see what that will look like at the state level. So stay tuned for that. And the Earned Income Tax Credit, this is a federal program that expired in the end of 2021, unfortunately. And the Earned Income Tax Credit was a program to incentivize those right above the poverty line who are often taxed back into poverty. And so this was a credit up to $1,500 for those making $21,000 or below, individuals. So a lot of folks understand the child tax credit, which is great, but that leaves out single individuals who are also hovering above the poverty line. So the Earned Income Tax Credit was extended throughout the pandemic, and the limit was increased. It used to be $600, it jumped up to $1,500. And again, is that going to lift someone directly out of poverty in the long term? Not necessarily, but it's immediate relief, especially when you're filing taxes, and that credit is the difference for some people between going back into the poverty line or hovering right above. So we'll be working to understand how to expand that perhaps at the state level and seeing what other leaders are doing at the federal level to improve that next year. And I'm going to spend the last few minutes talking about 988. Most folks are familiar with 911. That's our national emergency hotline or number. And most states at this point have a state suicide prevention hotline that any folks can access. We have, South Carolina currently has one call center to answer the existing suicide hotline. And last year, the federal government passed a guidance that's going to transition all of the individual state numbers into one national suicide prevention number. 988 is similar enough to 911 that they're hoping with some media outreach and PR that folks will be able to understand that when they're having a crisis, they can call 988 instead of 911 and be routed through some resources that are more pertaining to crisis and suicide, rather than involving law enforcement or draining some of our capacity within our first responders. And so this has to roll out July 16th. That's a federal mandate. Again, remember, we have one call center to answer all of the calls in the state of South Carolina. One other thing that's important to understand with suicide prevention is a law passed last year that requires 988 to be printed on all student IDs starting this August. So 7th graders and above who have a student ID issued this year and moving forward will have 988 printed on the student ID so that they can access the crisis line, which is phenomenal. And our Mental Health America call center in Greenville is expecting a major surge in youth accessing that line. And the fact of the matter is they don't have the capacity to answer a surge in calls. So they're worried about being able to train volunteers and staff the call center. They have 40 state-of-the-art stations where volunteers can come in person to answer calls. They also have the ability to have folks log in from wherever they are to answer calls. So that's phenomenal, but they don't have the funding to move into the capacity that they'd like to have. So when calls are not answered by the folks in Greenville because of their staffing issues or the fact that there's too many calls for the 40 seats, they go out of state, and that can take extra seconds or minutes, and we're talking about saving a life. We can't afford to wait, and they're worried that youth in particular are not going to wait an extra minute or two to speak to someone and while they're in crisis. And so there was a budget request for $1.5 million to fund the center operationally for the next year, and that was not included in the budget. So Mental Health America of Greenville County is scrambling to find grants to operate the center because this number has to go live in July. That's a federal mandate, but the funding is not there right now. And so we're working behind the scenes with our partner, United Way of Greenville County, to work with our upstate legislators to think of a plan for legislation that would fund this independently. So that is going to be a major focus area. So much of our work with the Behavioral Health Task Force, suicide prevention is part of mental health and behavioral health. So there's a lot of connection to our work that's ongoing, and we're moving into the advocacy space here to make sure that this is funded. And if you haven't had a chance to see the center, I recommend you do. It's phenomenal. I was able to tour it in the fall, and it's state of the art. They're working really hard to have volunteers, and they need all the help that they can get. They have a phenomenal training program, but to have the training program and to staff it, they need funding. So stay tuned. The last bill that didn't pass, it came so close to passing both sides, was the hate crimes bill. South Carolina is now one of 3 states who do not have a hate crimes bill in the entire country that carry more of a penalty for crimes motivated by race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, sexuality, etc. So this was sad not to see that come through. The Chamber of Commerce for South Carolina was a major proponent of this bill to attract companies from out of state, and this did not go through. So we'll be taking a look at that next year. In terms of strategy for next year, again, I mentioned we have to move into that agenda setting this summer to have that ready to go in the fall so that we can catch some new legislation that's coming up next year. We do have some framework based on what didn't pass that we can start adding to our agenda and building that up. But I really want to center community in the agenda setting process. And so what that looks like is having some community listening sessions and drafting sessions where we can work with folks that are most closely impacted to the issue to understand what some of their barriers are that they're facing, and if there's legislation that we can create or work with that's already existing to lessen some of those barriers. So that'll happen this summer and this fall. We can work on that pre-file legislation for 988 and really move into that mental health support advocacy. I'd like to have a voter registration event or several in the fall. Tony Thomas in Northside has done some great registration events, and he and I have already had conversations about what that might look like as a partnership. So that's very important. And I mentioned that we'll be moving into the data advocacy, and that is called a fiscal analysis. I'm going to move on to the next slide here to show you, oops, wrong side. Again, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but this is a dashboard of what we might be able to create. It'll take me about a year to get to this point, but we were selected part of a national cohort to create a dashboard where we'll be able to analyze all sources of spending on youth and children education type programs from the federal government, from the state, and from local and private dollars. And so this is an example that I pulled from Denver. You can see by category where money is being spent on safety, education, family programming, health, post-secondary success. So those are some of the goals that Denver has set. We'll have a similar dashboard. It will count how many programs serve youth, and then it will have kind of a dashboard of all of the inputs or sources of funding and how much is there. And so we'll be able to filter it by federal, state, local, or private dollars. And the hope that this will be able to show overlap in funding so we can redistribute some funding or show where there are gaps and say, this is a point where we need to be funding this service and it's not being spent. Where can we find those dollars? So data is a tool for advocacy. In a moment of transparency, I'm a little nervous because data is normally not something I do. I normally outsource that to some really talented data folks, but I'll be trained in this, and I think it'll be an amazing part of our advocacy toolkit. Okay, so I never want to leave a meeting without an action item. I'm pretty action oriented. This is an advocacy session, as you know, and so I wanted to make sure everyone is aware that an election is coming up. So we have early voting in Spartanburg County. This is for Spartanburg County, but I'm happy to get you information if you live in another county. Primary elections are June 14th. If you want to vote on election day and get your sticker, you can do that from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in your precinct polling place where you normally vote. There's a caveat because of some redistricting, you might be voting in a new location. So I'm going to show you how to check how to vote. If you'd like to vote early for any reason to avoid the lines, in Spartanburg County, you can vote from May 31st to June 14th up until election day, from 8:30 to 5. And your reasons for early voting could include that you're working, you're traveling, you have an appointment, you don't want to wait in line. There's a numerous number of reasons why you might not be able to vote. And you'll do so in the county voter registration office, which is at the county government in 366 North Church Street in the basement in room 1630. So you can walk in, have your voter registration handy and an ID, and you'll be able to fill out a ballot. And so I mentioned with redistricting, it's important to know where you vote, but I also want to be able to share some sample ballots. So if you want to do some research before you show up to vote, I'm going to show you how to do that. So there's a phenomenal website, scvotes.org. We have, again, I'm trying to just navigate here. I'm going to drop another link in the chat for you to find your voter registration, to find your polling place, or to find a sample ballot. I'm going to show you how to do that. The landing page for SC Votes is pretty easy. So scvotes.gov. You'll be able to access your online voter registration. You can check your status. You can update your voter registration. You can find a polling place. You can request an absentee ballot. It's all right there. And so when you go to the landing page, you'll select Get My Sample Ballot. It will first check your voter information. So you'll have to fill in your first and last name, your address, and the last 4 numbers of your social security number. So I've already done that, so you don't have to walk through that process, but the screen I'm sharing is what will come up next for you. And so you'll confirm your voting precinct. So I live in the Drayton Mills, and my voting precinct is the fire station, and that is where I know I'll vote on the 14th. But if I want to vote early, it's in the county government office. These are the districts that I will vote for in any given election. So all the way up from our US Congress and Senate, all the way down to our fire commissioner, school board, etc. And what I wanted to show you is how to view your sample ballot. So you're going to click View Sample Ballot. I'm going to stop sharing here for just a minute because I am going to take you back. Let's see. Here we go. Okie doke. So, yeah, I've lost my Zoom. Here we go. Here we go. Sorry, y'all. This technology is not as cooperative as I need it to be today. We're going to move into the sample ballot that I have on my screen. And you can request to locate both a Democrat or Republican sample ballot. And I'm going to take us to that page right now. As soon as it loads for us. And thank you for your patience, y'all. Okay, we should hopefully be seeing yes, here we are. So this is when you click on View Sample Ballot, you can select Democrat or Republican. And in the primaries, you can vote outside of the party you're registered to vote for normally. So I have pulled up both the Republican and the Democrat sample ballot. We have Republicans will be voting for Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, State Superintendent of Education, Commissioner of Agriculture, and a U.S. House Representative, District 4. So there are many elections that the folks will be voting for. Democrats, on the other hand, have only 3 elections coming up. So they'll be voting for governor, state superintendent of education, and U.S. Senate District 2. So you can see there are some differences, but this sample ballot will allow you to work and figure out who is coming up on that ballot, and you can research them there. So again, it's on scvotes.org. You're able to see many of these candidates before you head to the polls. And one last link I wanted to drop is a fantastic resource that our partner One Spartanburg put together with all of our candidate profiles. And so if you're a voter in Spartanburg, these are the folks that you'll see on both the Republican and Democratic tickets when you go to vote. So if you have any questions, this is a great resource to consider. Again, I challenge you to read up on who you might be voting for, where you'll be voting. Again, please check your polling place on scvotes.gov, and we'll be able to show up to the polls as a great challenge to our United Way to be advocates in that sense. So I am going to wrap up there. I'm excited to have this time with y'all this morning. We have a few minutes for questions. I'll share this for you. But I want to thank you all for your attention this morning. We can be, active in our both professional and our personal capacities, and I'm grateful for your time. And if I can be a resource to you in any way, whether it's regarding elections or local issues happening, I would love to be a resource for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And from now, I'm just open it up to questions if we have them.